Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our next segment on Squirreling with Logan. So, for today's topic, we're going to discuss and analyze the film Before Stonewall, the making of a gay and lesbian community. It was released in 1984, but then it actually did a little revamp in 2019, and after the revamp, it was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the United States National Film Registry for being considered culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. So basically, particularly the film is in regards to the conflicts of what was going on in the world throughout the beginning of Stonewall and how it came to be, and how it also kind of just described the way that Stonewall was the catalyst for the film. But it also talked about censorship and the ways that played a role, which we can see with production codes that we've talked about in class, but also just like the ways that access to media was for individuals. So in order to further analyze the film, I want to talk quickly about what Braveman says. In 1996, he actually analyzes a few of the different stories of police officers that were involved in the incident, as well as people from the community and like bystanders of the event. And so each of these people discussed their points of view, and I found that it was interesting because, why was Stonewall so significant when there was literally 7 other pretty major riots before Stonewall occurred? So kind of like, why is this one considered so impactful and the catalyst? So the 7 that I want to talk about are in 1958, there was the Los Angeles Cooper Donuts riot, where the owner was traditionally employing people who kind of like needed to get back up on their feet, but instead, people got really upset and ended up creating a riot. And then in 1961 in Milwaukee, there was the Black Knight Brawl. In 1965, there was in Philadelphia, the Dewey Restaurant sit-in. And there was also another sit-in in 1966 in New York City for Jules's Tavern sit-in. And then, again, twice in that same year in San Francisco, there was the Culpton's Cafeteria riot. And then in Los Angeles for a year, there was the Black Cat Tavern protest, which basically means, like, people didn't go for an entire year. They protested. And then lastly, in 1968, pretty much right before Stonewall occurred in Los Angeles, there was the, Patch Bar Flower Power protest. So I found that this was interesting because, like, looking back, it makes sense that the way that, like, the media, I think, was representing the queer community and the gay and lesbian community, that the sit-ins and the smaller brawls and stuff just were not considered as impactful. Therefore, they weren't going to make the news, or they weren't going to be portrayed as something that was important. And I also think that throughout these top 7, before Stonewall, it didn't affect a heterosexual community much at all. So I think that is the main difference between Stonewall, is that Stonewall brought in white men who were heterosexual. And on the night, June 28th, 1969, the night of the Stonewall Riots, basically, I actually found this interesting. The bar was owned by the Mafia, specifically a man named Matty the Horse. And he owned majority of the gay bars in the 60s and 70s in New York City, actually. There was, for a while, there was some conspiracy and something I was reading that it was because he was a homosexual. But actually, from the research that I gathered, I don't believe he was a homosexual. I believe that he was just a big profit-driven guy. So then that kind of made me, wonder, is the Mafia for gay rights, or is the Mafia for, just for making profit? And I would say that I think that they are for making profit, which is totally fine. But I think that, it's not fine. It's not fine. But I think that in the end of the day, it is an interesting question. Was the Mafia for individuals that are successful and people that... I'm trying to find a way to word this. Basically, was the Mafia for the rights, or were they just the first people that could capitalize on the queer community? So we're going to quickly listen to a really quick ad from our sponsors, and then we'll get back into some chatting about the Mafia.
If you're taking a trip with your friends, why pay for 4 hotel rooms to stay apart? When you could get one Airbnb and stay together.
So you are more than welcome to book through Airbnb, actually, and have the wonderful opportunity to visit the sites where these riots occurred. So thank you for Airbnb for sponsoring this, and I thoroughly recommend booking through them. So back to what we were saying, I believe that the Mafia did actually have a lot to do with the queer community, but as I was saying before, it's similar to the article that we discussed in class, Plan It Out. And Plan It Out, let's see, it analyzed the website Plan It Out, and it was a resource that the queer community was able to use in order to connect with people in their niche population, and create a sense of community. However, pretty quickly, the big businesses began to realize that there was so much profit behind gay and lesbian relationships, but also just in putting it out there. And so they really saw homosexuality as a business opportunity, on how that they, in Plan It Out, how they could create a website that would generate profit as opposed to just generating community for those that need it. And very similar, Maddie the Horse did this, in the 60s and 70s in New York City, and saw basically the business opportunity in order to cater to the queer community, and how that could create profit. So people in the bars, they were paying overpriced drinks and food, but also majority of them are actually, if you were pretty wealthy, you were actually getting extorted by the Mafia and the owners of the bars, because they would basically say hey, I know that you're homosexual, and if you don't pay me this amount of money, then I'm going to tell the people that you know. And so people were clearly defensive and were paying all this money, but it was worth it to them in the beginning, because you'd pay all this money and it would be overpriced, but they had the privacy and they had the comfort of an area that they knew. And so that, I believe, is one of the reasons why Stonewall was such a catalyst for the gay rights movement. And I honestly couldn't tell you what I think that any of the other ones even had the capability of being the catalyst, because I don't think that it would have been brought to the public eye. So we're going to do a quick, walkthrough of the events. So it was June 28th, 1969 at Stonewall Bar in New York City. And the Mafia was regularly paying off the police to make sure that they were not getting raided. And so they were actually getting raided less frequently than majority of the other gay bars. They were only getting raided once a month. And so the Mafia would also have a heads up hey, we're going to raid, we're going to come by. And so they would either close down, or they would make sure people weren't there, so that way the individuals were still protected. And the difference here is, on They had been raided an average of once a month. However, in this situation, they were raided twice in 1 week. So it was the second time in the same week in which they were raided. So it was very, very, very popular. And it was 9 police officers were involved in the raid. I was able to read through 4 of the interviews. And the police officers talked about the ways that, like, they were just told to go to this bar. It wasn't like they were walking around. Like, they had instructions, go to this place. And neither one of them, in their interviews, I don't know if I fully believe this, interacted with the Mafia. So it was a completely separate group, but obviously, like, you don't know that. Everything is so interconnected in New York City, and especially in the 60s and 70s. But instead, they continued to go to work, obviously, and they went into, 1 second, we're gonna watch another thing from one of our viewers. This is brought to us by Apple, and they're gonna help us, now that we're talking about envisioning that we're there, we're gonna look at some vision that we could do with AI. So as Apple just chatted with us, it's important to dream. But in this situation, it's not a dream. It all actually happened. So that evening, 9 police officers went to raid the bar. When they showed up, the bar was packed. It was actually one of the first times that it was fully packed when police officers arrived, because the owners were not warned about this particular raid. So the 9 police officers show up and they begin to arrest individuals. However, as they begin to arrest, things begin to become very, very violent. There is a lot of throwing and punching and resisting of arrest, rightfully so. But it ends up leading to the 9 police officers hiding in a closet in the bar. So the individuals, in my opinion, that moment became the catalyst of the gay rights movement, because it was the moment that a heterosexual was involved. And it was a moment where the media was going to begin to care about what was going on, because it began to impact a majority member. I'm not saying that that's right. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying that that is what I believe is what occurred. And so when the 9 police officers were in the raid, they then proceeded to lock themselves in the closet, and the bystanders and those involved lit the bar on fire. And in that, clearly a lot more issues began to arise, because now unfortunately they had to get out, and so much damage was being done that it became a full-blown riot. And it actually lasted for quite a while, and the police really, really struggled to gain control. But this moment really, it sparked activism as an awareness. And if you ask me, in my opinion, at this time, 49 states had homosexuality as illegal. So there was a lot of tension, no matter where you were in America. But I really think that the reason why this moment was so impactful is because it did affect people. It affected a lot of people, and it affected people that were not homosexual. It affected heterosexual individuals, which is sad as that is. The way that the media represents the queer community, especially during those times, people didn't care. So it had to be with somebody that they cared about. Kind of similar, in my opinion, to like the AIDS epidemic. Like, people didn't care until it looked like people who were not homosexual began to get it, and then there began to be a much bigger movement towards it. and it became a problem of how is it going to affect me, not how is it going to affect this community. So although the Stonewall Riots were devastating, I do believe that it led to the biggest gay rights movement that still continues today. And when I was looking at the Lily Vinces and Frank Cammy's papers and their manuscripts, there actually was a lot of documentation of the planning documents and the correspondence and flyers for the first gay rights pride parade, and all of them went back to titles like No More Stonewall, Because of Stonewall, all of those terminologies that just represented that it was Stonewall. That was the catalyst. And even in just looking at the documentary and throughout the documentary, hearing about the ways that tensions were rising, I found that it was fascinating that Stonewall was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think that you can certainly see that through the demonstrations that were occurring, but just in the ways that it led to, as the papers demonstrated, one of the most impactful moments, I believe, for gay rights, and how it sparked an entire movement that still now continues on. So come back next week. We're going to go ahead and analyze more specifically the Mafia and what other things did they catch on would make profit before the rest of the world did. So thanks so much for listening and squirreling out with me as always. I hope everybody has a spectacular day. Bye.